My name is Mike Scarf. I just wanted to thank Kim Davidson, the Executive Director of BC Epilepsy Society, for giving me this amazing opportunity to come up here today to tell everyone my own story. I can't say I've done anything like this before, so I guess we'll see how things go. But a big shout out to Kim Davidson, as well as everyone in the BC Epilepsy organization. They've been doing a lot of amazing things to increase awareness and education, not only within BC, but in North America as well. They've also been reaching out to Headway, which is just the Victoria-based epilepsy fundraiser. Been working collaboratively with them as well. So they've been all doing really amazing work to help awareness and education. So let's see how this goes. So my name's Mike Scarf. I'm 34 years old, and I am a fiscal negotiator with the BC government under the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. So I guess I'll start my story off. I was born in Thunder Bay, and I grew up in Sydney, BC. It's a small town just over on the island, just right by the Swartz Bay Ferries, actually. So growing up as a young child, I was much like a lot of other kids my age, enjoyed sports. I had a loving family, had a really good circle of friends, but to me at that age, those were all kind of things getting in the way of video games and candy, but that's okay. But it was from very early on, it seemed that I was kind of unique compared to my other friends, as I experienced some things that I thought were normal, but I didn't realize until a later time that they were pre-onsets or more minor forms of seizures. So it started as early as when I was 8 years old, actually. I was at a friend's party and I wasn't feeling right. It's very hard to explain to another person that has never experienced it before. I got my parents to pick me up and they asked me what was wrong, and all I could say is that I feel like I'm in a dream. Even though that's as far as it went, it was later, just ignore, maybe he just wasn't feeling well. It was just things as small as that I realized were perhaps early onsets to what would develop into epilepsy. A few years later, again, I'm at a friend's party. I'm starting to get this strange aura of, again, I feel like I'm in this dream state. And then I started having trouble talking. Again, this is a symptom that's very hard to describe to another person. So my friends are asking me, what's wrong, Mike, what's wrong? And I kept on wanting to say, I don't know, but I couldn't get the words out. I kept on stumbling. I kept saying, well, I don't. And I just ended up just letting out a grunt in frustration. So my parents picked me up, and again, I didn't know what to tell them. And although they were concerned, again, they just thought, well, he just maybe wasn't feeling well, So I continued through school, like I thought everything was fine. And then it was around the age of 15, 16, I started experiencing these bouts of numbness. So this would actually happen in the middle of a hockey game. That was full contact at the time. Didn't go that well. So the numbness would start in my feet. It would slowly travel up, it would go into my knees, it would go into my hands, and then eventually travel up to my mouth. My teeth would go numb. My tongue would go numb. And then eventually it went into my vision. I would get sunspots. When you look at the sun really quickly, you look away, you get that sunspot in your vision. Well, because this happened to me several times, in this particular instance I'm thinking of, the entire right side of my vision was completely gone. And during a full contact hockey game, the end result is not going to end very well. Now, I wish I had the education and awareness at that time, as well with my hockey teammates. Because when you're on a team like that, you can't just say, well, I'm sick, see you later. Because the mentality of a team like that, you're looked down upon if you say, I'm sick, and then you just leave the hockey game. So if my teammates, even myself, had the awareness in the education, I could have just said, I'm actually having a seizure right now. So to continue, after it would go through my vision, that's when it would actually go into my brain. And people that I've known all my life, their names didn't sound right to me. I know Dave. I've known Dave since I was 4 years old, but for whatever reason, his name didn't sound correct to me. So again, very strange symptoms to be able to describe to someone else. And then finally after that, I would get migraines that would keep me up. I could barely watch TV, and again, telling my parents, they had no idea what was going on. But again, still at that time, I didn't have the education. I also didn't have the awareness of what was happening at that time. So we'll fast forward to my grade 12 math provincial exam. This is when I decided to have my first tonic-clonic, formerly known as a grand mal seizure. It was my very last exam before graduating, and I was actually doing quite well in the exam. But I blacked out. And when I came to, I was on an ambulance stretcher. I had no idea what was happening. So what had happened is, while I was writing the exam, I blacked out. I slumped over on my desk. I then hit the floor and I started convulsing. And with my tonic-clonic seizures in particular, my right arm goes up over my head and I start convulsing. My very first seizure was so violent, I ended up dislocating both my shoulders. And when I came to, both my shoulders were dislocated. I was extremely confused. I was terrified. And from that point forward, that's when my life really started to change. It was a very scary time for myself as well as my family. My family doesn't have a history of epilepsy, so it was extra scary for the fact that we had no idea where this was coming from. So over the next 3 years or so, I had a few more seizures. Now, I can say that I feel that I'm extremely fortunate. Even though I have lived with it for 17 years, I only had approximately 3 to 4 seizures a year. And I know more severe forms of epilepsy can have hundreds, dozens a day. So I do really consider myself fortunate. But I soon found myself not being able to drive. Hockey, the sport that was definitely the sport that I loved for many years, I was done playing with it. My neurologist said, you're done with contact sports. My shoulders would dislocate on a regular basis. It got to the point where I couldn't shake someone's hand without my shoulder dislocating. University was a big struggle. That was a really tough time. Stress and lack of sleep are major contributors for my form of epilepsy, which to this day, actually, doctors still can't necessarily pinpoint my particular form of epilepsy because it's not my family. Even though I went through the rung of tests, brainwave tests, you name it, they still can't necessarily exactly pinpoint the cause of it. But going through university was very tough because school for me was extra stressful. I would have seizures during exams. I would have them during midterms. I would have them during studying. So, especially during midterms and exams, needless to say, it's not the greatest time to have a seizure, especially after studying for almost 2 weeks for this test. There I go. But the scariest thing about it was waking up to, a group of 40, 50, 60 strangers being around me, terrified. And it's just always as the paramedics show up, And again, this is all to do with education and awareness. No one really knew what was happening. Not even the professors at the university necessarily knew what to do. Because in an epileptic situation, you don't necessarily have to call the ambulance. If you have the education and you have the awareness, you conduct what you normally do. You have your timer, you make sure everything's out of their way, and then once they come to, everything is fine. And every single time that I had one at school, ambulance was always called. And when you're a student, you have to pay $90 for an ambulance bill every single time. Things just as small as that really start, adding up. But it was also a little difficult too, because then I had several classmates, I started to notice they were scared of me because they just didn't know what to do. They see this guy hit the floor, convulse, and they just didn't know what to do. And again, it all has to do with education and awareness. If they had the education and awareness, they would say, oh, well, he's got epilepsy, he's a normal person, who cares? It did not happen very often, but I definitely did notice that several times. Now, I lived out, as I said, I grew up in Sydney. And once my driver's license was taken away, getting to and from the University of Victoria was very tough. I was about 35 minutes walking distance to the closest bus stop. Although my family certainly helped with giving me rides to and from university, on those days it wasn't possible. You get to walk to the bus stop on a lovely day like today, take 2 buses, takes about 2 hours each way just to get to and from university. So it was very tough going to every class with, 2 thumbs up saying, hey, I'm super happy to be here. So needless to say, I missed a couple classes. And there was a particular situation where, I got my driver's license back here and there because my seizures were fairly spaced out. I was able to drive here and there. There was a particular instance where I was very nervous for an economics presentation. And I was driving, and then I just blacked out. And then when I came to, I was on a sidewalk in the middle of the hill with a binder in my hand, having no clue how I got there. So I just kept walking home. My brother was asleep at the time. I said, Dan, I have had a seizure. My truck's over at UVic. We need to get it. And again, my memory was still coming to. This was 10, 15 minutes later, so I was still trying to put the pieces together. And as we were driving the same road I was driving, there was my truck nestled in a ditch with the keys still in the ignition and the driver's side door was open. So I had had a seizure while I was driving, and I am so infinitely fortunate that at that very moment I had my foot on the brake and I was able to nestle into a ditch and I didn't hurt anyone. So it was times like that that were very terrifying. And it was shortly a few years down the road that was especially difficult. It was at this point that was the most difficult. It was the hardest to deal with. So I was living in what's called Langford. I'm sure many of you sounds familiar. That's on the island. It's just about 30 minutes outside of Victoria. And I was again living about 35 minutes walking distance to the closest bus stop. And I had my driver's license revoked at the time due to a seizure about a year ago. But because I was so far away from the closest bus stop, just doing 2 errands for the day, I'm going to go get my hair cut. That could take up to 4.5, 5, 6 hours because you have to walk to the bus stop, you have to wait for the bus, get off, do your errands, wait for the bus, finally get on it, and then you have to walk home. So my buddy told me, I need a ride. And I had made the mistake that day, said, you know what, I'm going to drive today. I'm going to go pick up my buddy. Even though I had been experiencing symptoms, I had been experiencing these auras. And again, this is very hard to describe to another person. The only way I can describe it is, say you're getting ready in the morning, and instead of grabbing instead of grabbing hair gel for me, I would grab my deodorant. People do it all the time. But you start thinking, was that a symptom? Maybe that's a symptom of an oncoming seizure episode. Or maybe I'm being paranoid. So for me, I consistently have this battle in my mind. Was that a symptom, or am I just being paranoid? So I had been experiencing those symptoms throughout the day. It was the day that I should not have been driving, but I decided to anyways. Well, I blacked out, and I had a seizure, and I ended up causing a 4-car accident. Now, again, I shouldn't have been driving, and it wasn't until, it was about two years later, and I thought everything was fine. And then I got a call from an ICBC jester saying that, thank God for me, no one was hurt. They said, you're responsible for the accident and you owe us $45,000. And unfortunately, that was completely my own fault because I shouldn't have been driving. So what I want to say to you is I know that there are a lot of people out there that live with epilepsy and who have loved ones who live with epilepsy, and I know how hard it can be not driving because that really crushes your independence at times, but please do not, because you're looking at an example right now of a person who decided to drive and really ended up paying for it. I ended up declaring bankruptcy because of it. It was a really hard time. But I do want to say that it ended up with a very happy ending. I ended up graduating university with a bachelor's degree in economics. I've been with the public sector for over 9 years in an extremely rewarding career that I've loved since day one. But I feel like I really don't think I would have been able to do any of this without my friends and my family. My family was so key getting through all of these really tough times. My father, my mother, my sister, my brother, always being there at the hospital anytime I would experience an episode. They would be there for me when I needed a ride anywhere, to school, to work. My friends were always there to put a smile on my face during the really tough times. Without them, it would have been much more difficult to get through this journey. Another key success was my neurologist, 100%. So because he was able to determine new medication levels, I've only had one seizure in the last 3 years, which for me is the first time since I started experiencing epilepsy since I was 17. And it's been given, and since it's been so long, I've had the opportunity to get my driver's license back, which I still haven't gotten yet because I'm not exactly in the hugest hurry to get back on that driver's seat. So from that neurologist, through our meetings, through our appointments, he was able to say, look, maybe we should try something new. And I said, anything. I am so sick and tired of having these seizures like clockwork 3-4 times a year. I want to be able to get my independence back. And through the new medication levels, it's made a huge difference. I also have an incredible partner over here, Kate, pregnant with our first child-to-be on July 1st, which we're very excited about. So I have so much to be thankful for. Even though I live with epilepsy, I still live an amazing, rich, wonderful, very happy and fulfilling life.